Think about the last time someone crossed a line with you. Maybe it was a coworker taking a passive-aggressive shot in a meeting, a friend making a joke at your expense, or a partner subtly twisting the truth to make you look like the problem. You sat there, feeling the heat rise in your chest, knowing exactly what was happening. You knew you should push back, you knew you should defend yourself, but instead, you did nothing. You froze, you smiled, you laughed it off, or you swallowed your words and changed the subject to keep the peace, and then you went home. You sat down to eat dinner, your fork in your hand, but your mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying the moment, rewording what you should have said, trying to figure out why it affected you as much as it did. Every time you stayed up at night mentally rehearsing arguments, you handed your peace of mind over to someone who probably forgot what they said to you the very next morning. You probably told yourself you were just being the bigger person, or worse, you called yourself a coward. You asked yourself, why couldn't I just speak up? Why do I always let people walk all over me? I am here to tell you that you are asking the wrong question. What happened in that room was not a failure of courage. It was not a personality flaw, it was biology. What you experienced was your nervous system executing a highly sophisticated, deeply ingrained survival strategy that you learned before you were old enough to understand what was happening to you. Today, we are going to dismantle the illusion of your cowardice. We are going to dive into the deep psychology of Carl Jung, the neuroscience of trauma, and the brutal strategic truths of Machiavelli to understand exactly why your brain paralyzes you in moments of conflict. And more importantly, you are going to learn how to hack this biological program, reclaim your exiled anger, and transform from a reactive target into an utterly unshakable, sovereign individual. Act 1. The biology of paralysis. To understand why you freeze, you have to understand the machine that is running your mind. You have a part of your brain, deep, ancient, buried beneath all the language and logic and self-awareness, whose entire job is to scan the world for threats constantly. Every room you walk into, every conversation you enter, every text message you open, it is always asking the same question, am I safe here? For millions of years, this system kept our ancestors alive. As neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky explains, when a zebra sees a lion, its body goes into total emergency mode, adrenaline, cortisol, rapid heartbeat, muscles primed for flight. But as soon as the danger passes, the system shuts down and the body returns to balance. But you are not running from a lion. You are sitting in a conference room or a living room dealing with abstract, emotional threats. Rejection, criticism, dismissal, disrespect. Your brain does not know the difference. When it detects an emotional threat, it responds immediately before your thinking mind has even had a chance to process what happened. You feel it as heat in your chest, a tightening in your throat, or that sudden inexplicable urge to say something back, to defend yourself, to disappear, to cry. Your shoulders come up, your jaw tightens, your breathing gets shallow, and your whole body contracts inward, bracing for impact. In that fraction of a second, your prefrontal cortex, the logical, articulate, confident part of your brain, shuts down. The limbic system takes the wheel, and the limbic system only knows survival. You have heard of fight or flight, but psychology recognizes other responses, and one of them is freeze. You freeze because, on a primal level, your nervous system calculated that fighting back would escalate the danger, and running away was impossible, so you stayed perfectly still, you played dead, you smiled. Act 2. The empath's origin story. Why did your nervous system decide that fighting back was so dangerous? To answer that, we have to look backward. The person who feels everything, who carries everyone else's burdens, who cannot seem to say no matter how exhausted they are. That person is not specially gifted. That person is a child who never got permission to have their own needs. Think about the actual atmosphere of the house you grew up in. Was it predictable? Was it safe? Could you walk through the front door after school and have any reasonable idea of what mood you were going to walk into? For a lot of people who identify as empaths, the answer to those questions is no. Maybe the emotional climate in your home shifted without warning, like weather you could never quite forecast. Maybe love felt conditional, available when you were helpful, distant when you had needs of your own. Carl Jung had a name for what do children do in that kind of environment. He called it premature ego adaptation. A child's first job, biologically and psychologically, is to develop a sense of self, to figure out who they are, what they like, what they feel, what they need. But when a child's environment is emotionally unpredictable, that work gets interrupted. The child cannot afford to focus inward because the real threat is outward. So the brain does something remarkable. It redirects all that energy toward reading other people. You learned to scan the room the second you walked in. You picked up on the subtle shift in a parent's voice. You noticed the tension in someone's shoulders before a single word was spoken. You became extraordinarily good at predicting how the people around you were feeling because your sense of safety depended on it. This is not empathy in the way we romanticize it. This is a nervous system on high alert, wired for threat detection. You learned that the safest way to survive an unpredictable environment was to become invisible, or to become useful, Acts 3, the architecture of the fawn response. When you froze in that recent confrontation, you likely didn't just stay silent. You probably tried to fix it. You laughed, you agreed, you de-escalated. This is known as the fawn response. The fawn response is what happens when someone learns, usually early in life, that the safest way to manage conflict is to make the other person feel okay. Not to address the conflict, not to hold your ground, not even to leave, but to soothe, to smooth things over, to find the thing that will bring the temperature down and restore the peace. Empaths are particularly prone to the fawn response because fawning feels like kindness. It feels like empathy. It feels like the mature, generous thing to do. You are keeping the peace, you are de-escalating, you are being the bigger person, but underneath it, something else is happening. You are learning that your own discomfort, your own pain, your own needs are less important than maintaining the other person's equilibrium. You are training yourself over and over to put yourself last, and you are training the relationship to function in a way where your well-being is never the priority. When someone treats you poorly, criticizes you, or disrespects you, your body registers the threat. But instead of deploying anger to protect you, your programming overrides it. You deploy appeasement. You swallow what you actually think because you do not want conflict. You tell someone you are fine when you are not because their feelings feel more urgent than yours. You talk yourself out of a gut feeling because you don't want to be difficult. Over time, this becomes so natural that it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like just who you are. You call yourself a good person, but Carl Jung would call it by its true name: cowardice, psychological dysfunction, a persona so inflated it has completely eclipsed who you really are. Acts 4. Dissociation. Escaping the flesh. If you look closely at the moments when you freeze, you will notice a strange sensation. You are physically in the room, but mentally, you are hovering near the ceiling. Emotions feel distant, the body seems anesthetized, and life is lived as if it were being observed from the outside. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk observed over decades of work with traumatized patients that trauma often pushes the individual out of the body. The mind dissociates from sensory experience as a last resort to maintain sanity amid pain. When feeling hurts too much, the mind learns to escape. The nervous system understands that being fully present in the body is dangerous. Physical sensations begin to carry pain, terror, helplessness, or shame. And when the body becomes a field of threat, the only possible way out is to disconnect from it. The mind takes absolute control because thinking seems safer than feeling. When you are attacked or disrespected, you don't feel the primal, bodily urge to fight back because you have evacuated your body. You live entirely in your head, hyper-rationalizing the abuse instead of feeling the outrage. You analyze the other person. You think, why are they doing this? They must be having a bad day. I can see the childhood wound driving their cruelty. You use your profound understanding of their history to excuse their present behavior. You convert your ability to detect the shadow into a project, a mission, a reason to believe that if you just offer enough love, you can be the one to finally heal them. But understanding someone's pain does not make them safer to be close to. Seeing where someone's behavior comes from does not reduce the impact of that behavior on you. Your depth of insight is not a contract. By analyzing their pain, you are simply distracting yourself from your own. You are using empathy as a dissociation tactic. Act 5. The exiled guardian, the shadow. So where did your fight response go? If you are wired to survive, where is the aggression, the assertiveness, the boundary-setting power that every human is born with? It didn't disappear. You buried it. Carl Jung believed that every human being has a shadow, The shadow is simply the collection of parts of yourself that got pushed underground, the qualities and impulses that were not acceptable in your environment. You were taught that anger is dangerous, that to feel it, let alone express it, is to lose control, to become mean, selfish, not nice. So you swallowed it. You smiled through clenched teeth. You turned your anger inward, turning it into guilt, shame, or fatigue. You told yourself you were rising above, but in truth you were abandoning yourself. Jung warned us that this is one of the most destructive patterns in the psyche, the systematic repression of vital instincts in service of a false ideal. When you cut yourself off from your anger, you also cut yourself off from your truth, because anger is not your enemy. Anger doesn't arise in a vacuum. It comes when a boundary is crossed, when your values are ignored, when your time, energy, or dignity is being drained without consent. Anger is your internal guardian. It says, something is not okay. You are not okay with this. By trying to be a good person and pushing your anger into the shadow, you amputated your own defense mechanism. You left the gates to your psychological city wide open, unguarded, and you threw away the key. And the most dangerous part? When you build an identity entirely around being accommodating and boundaryless, you send a beacon into the world. Act 6. The predator's radar. When you build your entire identity around being agreeable, around being low maintenance, around never making waves, you send out a very specific signal to the world. That signal says, I will not push back. I will absorb whatever you give me. You can treat me however you want, and I will still be here. Most people are not sitting around consciously plotting who to target, but certain people have a very finely tuned radar for this specific signal, and they find it extraordinarily attractive. Narcissists, chronic emotional exploiters, and manipulators recognize the signs. The person who apologizes first even when they did nothing wrong, the person who smooths over conflict at their own expense, the person who works twice as hard to make someone else comfortable and calls that love. They don't want to love you. They want access to someone who will not hold them accountable. They want someone who has decided at a deep, unconscious level that they are not worth fighting for. When conflict arises, they watch how you handle it. Rather than matching the energy of the conflict, pushing back, or holding the line, you tend to de-escalate, to soften, to ask what you might have done differently. To a person looking for leverage, this is extraordinarily useful information. It tells them that conflict is a tool that can be used to reset power in the dynamic, that if things get uncomfortable enough, you will move to make it comfortable again, and you will absorb more than your share of the responsibility for what went wrong. You become what Jung called an unconscious container for other people's rejected emotions. The narcissist's shame, the emotional vampire's insecurity, the manipulator's self-loathing, all of it gets quietly transferred to you, and you absorb it without realizing it, and then wonder why you feel so heavy all the time. You are freezing because your nervous system is trapped in a loop. You are terrified of conflict, so you absorb abuse. You absorb abuse, so predators flock to you. Predators flock to you, so your nervous system remains perpetually under threat. The cycle ends here, Act 7. Hacking the nervous system, understanding all of this intellectually changes nothing on its own. Because the real problem was never ignorance. You suspected most of this already. You didn't need a psychologist to tell you something was off. What you lack is not knowledge. It is the practical biological mechanism to override the freeze response in real time. Here is how you hack the nervous system. The first step, and honestly the hardest one, is this: don't respond. Not yet. When you're triggered, every instinct you have is pushing you toward a response, toward action, toward saying something, doing something, resolving something right now. Resist that. Not because your feelings don't matter, but because the version of you that exists in the first 30 seconds after being triggered is not the version of you that makes good decisions. That version is operating almost entirely from reflex, from protection, from the part of your brain that thinks it's still fighting for survival. When you don't respond immediately, it feels like you're losing. Like silence means you're accepting what happened. Like by not firing back, you're somehow agreeing with it. That feeling is very convincing, and it is almost never accurate. The pause is not surrender. The pause is strategy. It's the moment where you reclaim authorship over what happens next, instead of handing it over to whoever or whatever triggered you. Because the moment you react from a triggered place, you've given them the wheel. The second step is to bypass logic and go straight to the body. You try to think your way out of an emotional reaction, to reason with yourself, to logic your way back to calm, and it doesn't work because the reaction is happening in a part of the brain that isn't accessible through language and logic. You have to go through the body first. Slow, deliberate breathing, particularly a longer exhale, activates the part of your nervous system responsible for rest and recovery. It signals to your body that the threat has passed. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 6. Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes that the first step to healing trauma is not to understand what happened, but to perceive what is happening now in the body. Practice grounding. Touch a cold surface, press your feet against the ground, hold an object firmly. These sensory stimuli activate the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for regulating and calming the body. It builds an internal ground. Once the biological panic subsides, you can finally access your prefrontal cortex. You are back in the driver's seat. Act 8. Machiavelli's Lion and the Power of Silence. Now that you have stopped the freeze response, what do you do? Machiavelli used a metaphor that still holds up perfectly today. He talked about the lion and the fox. The lion has raw power, strength, intimidation, the ability to dominate through force. But the lion is not smart enough to recognize traps. The fox, on the other hand, is clever, can sniff out danger, navigate around deception, and work through complexity. As an empath, you already have the fox. You can read the room, you can see the shadow, you know exactly what is happening. But a fox alone cannot stand up to a wolf pack. You need the lion. You have not developed the lion capacity because you were told that toughness is aggression. But true lion energy is calm, it is grounded. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you have limits, that those limits exist for good reasons, and that you will enforce them without drama and without apology. And the greatest weapon of the lion is silence. We live in a culture that rewards noise. We have been conditioned to believe that silence is awkward, that it signals weakness, that talking more equals showing more value. We over-explain, we justify decisions nobody asked us to justify. We argue our case long after the argument is over. When someone disrespects you, they expect a reaction. They want the laugh, they want the flinch, they want you to get defensive or to over-explain yourself. That reaction is their reward. When you go quiet instead, you pull the reward away. You leave the disrespect hanging in the air with nowhere to go. And that silence, that cold, deliberate pause, says something without you having to say a word. It says, I noticed, I am not scrambling to fix the energy. I am not here to make you comfortable after you just tested me. I am watching and I am deciding. When someone says something designed to provoke you, your instinct is to defend yourself. The moment you defend yourself, you have confirmed that the attack landed. You have shown them the button. Instead, pause for 3 seconds. Then, respond with something completely neutral. Not angry, not sarcastic, just flat. Interesting point. Then turn away. You denied them the reaction they came for. You made their comment look small not by insulting them, but by refusing to treat it as worthy of a real response. That is not passivity. That is precision. Acts 9. The hollow moment and individuation. If you practice this, something profound will begin to shift inside you. Carl Jung called it the individuation imperative. It is the drive of your psyche to become who you actually are, not who your family needed you to be, not who your culture told you to be. There comes a quiet moment of recognition. You look at the relationships you have maintained through endless self-sacrifice, and you feel a specific kind of emptiness that is different from tiredness. Jung called it the hollow moment. The empath stops fighting their own perception and starts listening to it. They simply see what is there, and seeing changes everything. You realize you cannot miss someone who was never real. This is the birth of the sovereign empath. Before the transformation, your emotional boundaries were non-existent. You felt what other people felt, and you responded to it. You organized your behavior around managing other people's emotional states, often at the direct expense of your own. After the transformation, you can still feel what other people feel. That neurological sensitivity does not go away, but you have developed an observing ego, a part of consciousness that can witness the emotional absorption happening and choose whether to allow it or to maintain your own center. You move from being lived by your empathy to consciously directing it. You stop treating your abilities as a rescue mandate and start using them as a protection mechanism. Emotional field perception exists so you can navigate environments wisely. Unconscious pattern recognition exists to protect you from unsafe people. Shadow detection exists so you can make clear-eyed decisions about who to let close. You begin to practice what Jung called sacred selfishness, taking your own development, your own well-being, and your own psychological health as seriously as you take everyone else's. It means recognizing that the person who gives from a depleted self is not more virtuous than the person who gives from a full one. They are just less honest. Acts 10. Becoming untouchable. There is a version of you that nobody can mess with. A version of you that doesn't flinch when someone comes at you sideways. A version of you that moves through the world with such quiet confidence that people feel it before you even open your mouth. Getting there means abandoning the childish idea that being a good person means being a doormat. It means accepting that if you want to be free, you must stop being afraid of conflict. The people who try to manipulate you, who expect you to fawn, freeze, and apologize for your own existence, will be terrified of this new version of you. When you stop reacting, they lose their script. When you establish boundaries without guilt, their entire system of leverage collapses. They will call you cold. They will call you selfish. They will say, "You've changed, let them." You do not owe anyone a return to the version of yourself that was willing to be used. The version that absorbed pain without complaint. The version that kept quiet, stayed small, and gave everything while quietly falling apart. You are not broken. You were responding appropriately to a context that was asking something of you that no one should ever have to give. Your nervous system froze because it was trying to save your life. It did its job. You survived. But you are not a child anymore. You are not trapped in that unpredictable house. You do not have to read the room to survive. You have the power to name the room, to set the frame, to decide what behavior you will and will not accept. The next time someone tests you, do not freeze. Do not run. Do not fawn. Take a breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Look them dead in the eye. Hold the silence. And let them be the one to realize that the person they thought they could push around no longer exists. You are awake now. Act like it.